a peaceful trout pond a few miles from the Powells' home. Fishing is Will Powell's favourite hobby. He's fished for the Welsh angling team, but he was born in Scotland.
My father was a Welshman who'd moved there during the war. Met my mum, married her, had 6 children. I was educated in Glasgow. I left school just before I was 15 with no qualifications whatsoever.
Patience and determination are part of the makeup of every good fisherman.
He is a fighter. When he's got his mind on something, to do something and get to the bottom of it, he'll do it.
Robbie was the youngest son, and when he died, his father was determined to find out what had gone wrong. His boy is always on his mind.
It's like a full-time job. I always think about it. It doesn't matter where I am. I'm thinking about the next step. What have I got to do next to try to establish the truth?
After Robbie's death, there was little time for hobbies. Will Powell gave up the rod and took up the pen. He started to write the first of thousands of letters.
I've just learned from the passing of letters back and forth how maybe to draft a letter a little bit better than I used to do it. And obviously the use of a computer has helped with spelling and things.
Andrew Lindsay from Lancashire has been his solicitor for over 10 years. He's got to know him as well as anyone.
William is a very demanding client, quite rightly, because of what's happened to him with Robbie's death. He's worked to the nth degree to seek justice.
Will Powell thought success would come quickly.
Maybe I was naive initially because I felt that once Robert died and I identified the consultations and what had gone wrong and what had been said, that someone in authority would think that this had to be investigated properly, not only for our sake, but to make sure it never ever happened again.
He wasn't happy with the explanations given by the GPs, so he made an official complaint against them. In 1990, a committee of the local health service in Swansea took just an afternoon to clear Doctors Elwyn Hughes, Michael Williams, Paul Bolatz and Keith Hughes of any negligence. Dr. Nicola Flower was given a warning, the minimum punishment. It was a crushing blow for Will Powell.
I have not met anyone as yet who's had a serious complaint against a general practitioner who's been satisfied with the complaints procedure. It just does not work for the ordinary man.
He appealed to the Welsh office in Cardiff, and in the course of the hearing there was an extraordinary revelation. Some time after Robbie was laid to rest, the Ystrad-Gunlais GPs who'd looked after him went to a secret meeting. Dr. Elwyn Hughes, Dr. Mike Williams, Dr. Paul Bolatz, Dr. Keith Hughes and Dr. Nicola Flower met Dr. Forbes secretly at Morriston Hospital. No record was ever kept.
I find the meeting suspicious for several reasons. Firstly, there was no record kept of the meeting, either the date or the content of what was discussed. Secondly, 5 GPs involved in a son's death and a hospital consultant who suspected a life-threatening condition all meet, yet no one appears to remember what was discussed. They must have discussed Robert's treatment prior to his death, and in my view, they must have discussed the contents of the medical records.
Dr. Forbes gave evidence at the Welsh Office appeal. Wales This Week reconstructed some of the evidence.
So there were 5 doctors present?
Yes.
When did it take place?
Well, I cannot remember exactly when it took place.
You are totally unable to help?
Totally unable to help you.
Can you tell us where it took place?
Yes, the meeting took place at Morriston Hospital.
The meeting was 1 month before the inquiry into whether or not any of these doctors or Dr. Flower had breached their terms of service. Is it your recollection that any aspect of that meeting had anything to do with the forthcoming inquiry?
It's my recollection that there was nothing at the meeting was discussed about the forthcoming inquiry.
Would you tell us how often it is that 5 general practitioners come together for a meeting with you to discuss a death which has occurred several months earlier?
I would think that would be a unique occasion.
Yes. And yet, may I respectfully submit to you, you seem to have a remarkably vague recollection of what took place.
Yes, I have a remarkably vague recollection of what took place.
Dr. Mike Williams, one of the GPs at the meeting, had once worked at Morriston Hospital under Dr. Forbes. Dr. Williams was the GP who had the 5th chance to find out what was wrong with Robbie. He claimed he'd referred him back to hospital. Then the boy had 6 days to live.
It's irrefutable that the letter was never sent. That's been admitted by all concerned.
This letter gave the impression that Dr. Williams had referred Robbie back to the hospital. There was no trace of it in the hospital records or in the health centre records when Will Powell checked them just after his son's death. It turned up several months later, dated the day after Dr. Williams saw Robbie. Linda Sims, a secretary at the health centre, admitted to the Welsh Office appeal she typed the letter after Robbie's death. Wales This Week also reconstructed her evidence.
I just typed a letter about a child that had died, and that's not normal. In fact, I think it's the first time that I'd ever done that.
She said she discussed the letter with Dr. Williams.
He said the letter wasn't going to be sent and that we should date it the day that he dictated it.
When he eventually read this referral letter, Will Powell realised the doctor's description of Robbie's condition was different to his own.
It doesn't reflect accurately what happened at the consultation. For argument's sake, Robert was vomiting the night before. Dr. Williams prescribed Diorolite. There's no mention in the referral letter of that medication, and he denies in the letter that Robert was vomiting. And this was obviously solid proof for him to corroborate his untruthful evidence.
In neither the letter nor Robbie's health centre notes was there any mention of any medication being given to the boy by Dr. Williams. Will Powell spent months tracking down a copy of a prescription for Diorolite, often used to treat vomiting.
The prescription is very important because it supports Mr. and Mrs. Powell's evidence that Robert had been vomiting prior to going to see Dr. Williams on the 11th. It's also noticeable that from the notes that this prescription was never noted. Dr. Williams never noted that he'd given a prescription.
But there was another dramatic turn of events at the Welsh Office appeal. In March 1992, the appeal was adjourned for 6 months until September.
When we got back to the resumed hearing in September 1992, we were faced with medical notes and records that were found on our side of the room, which contained extra notes that we'd never seen before.
Will Powell and his legal team asked the appeal for a criminal investigation. The request was refused.
We took the view that justice wasn't being seen to be done, and consequently it was the view of the whole team, counsel, myself, Mr. Powell, that we should simply abandon the appeal and walk out, which is precisely what we did.
The Welsh Secretary David Hunt and then his successor John Redwood both repeated the denial that the Welsh Office had the records. Will Powell went to the Parliamentary Ombudsman. He ruled that the Welsh Office had received the records and its actions had denied the Powell family a proper appeal.
The Ombudsman looked into it, investigated it, and found out that there had been maladministration on the part of the Welsh Office. I don't think that there was any explanation given as to how these extra notes could have appeared as they did.
By this time, the Powell family had started legal proceedings against the doctors concerned. It was to be a long battle with many setbacks for Will Powell.
William comes up with further analysis. He argues it with you. There's certainly no argument back, and you pick up the cudgels and you go with it because you know that what he says is irresistible, and what he says is, in my mind at least, quite correct.
Morriston Hospital in Swansea and the local health authority who ran it were involved in the first major civil action by the Powell family. They were particularly concerned about Robbie's treatment whilst under the care of Dr. William Forbes.
The action went on for a number of years, and with a month to go before trial, Morriston Hospital admitted liability for negligence, and they also admitted liability for causation, which means that they admitted that the negligence caused Robert's death.
The courts also dealt with a claim by the Powells that they had not been dealt with fairly by the 5 GPs. The judge agreed with the legal team representing the doctors. They argued that doctors did not have a legal duty to tell the parents the truth about what had happened once a child had died. It was a bombshell. Will Powell appealed to the High Court, but again the ruling was in favour of the doctors.
We then petitioned the House of Lords, and they said exactly the same thing.
It means that doctors have a duty of care to parents while the child is alive. But once the child has died, doctors don't have to tell the truth.
But the ruling did amaze the doctors' own union.
In response to that, the British Medical Association said GPs could now put a gloss on the cause of death without fear of litigation, which I think is a damning statement for the medical profession to make.
But the body that regulates the profession, the General Medical Council, quickly reformed their own advice to doctors.
The GMC then subsequently changed their guidelines to tell doctors that they had an ethical duty and a moral duty, if not a legal duty, to tell the truth.
The family home in South Wales began to reflect some of the success of Will Powell's campaign.
I am very proud of him, very, very proud of him. I don't know how he's done it, but he's worked very, very hard these last 13 years.
In 1999, the then Home Secretary Jack Straw presented the Powells with a major award from the Campaign for the Freedom of Information.
I was very proud to receive it. It was very emotional. It was like having some type of credit for doing something good. It was realising I'm not doing it just because I'm vindictive. I'm doing it because we're entitled to that information.
Domestically, there's no doubt that the struggle has taken its toll on both of them.
It's hard. I mean, it's like he gets uptight sometimes, and if I'm here, he'll take it out on me because I'm here to take it out on. But I know that it's not Billy. It's the pressure he's under.
I've stuck with him because I believe him. I believe in the justice that he's seeking. I'm the father of a 24-year-old boy who, had Robbie lived, would have been 2 months younger than Robbie. And in a large measure, I can well recognise William's determination.
The courts hadn't provided the answers. In part 3, how the Powell struggle changed direction.